At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law came up to me and whispered, "I'm pregnant with..." What she said next changed everything forever. But before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand who I am and what I sacrificed to build the family that was about to crumble around me. My name is Patricia, and for 35 years, I've been the foundation that held everyone together. I'm 60 now, with silver hair that I keep neatly styled and hands that show the wear of decades spent caring for others. When I married Richard 37 years ago, I thought I was getting a partner for life. What I got instead was a man who expected me to be his mother, his maid, and his cheerleader, all rolled into one. I gave up my dreams of becoming a teacher to raise our son, Michael. While other women my age were building careers, I was building a home. I made sure Richard's shirts were pressed for his business meetings. I packed his lunches with little notes that he never acknowledged. I organized his social calendar, remembered his mother's birthday when he forgot, and smiled graciously at company parties where I was introduced as Richard's wife. Never Patricia, never someone with her own identity. When Michael was born, I poured every ounce of love I had into raising him right. I drove him to soccer practice in my beat-up station wagon while Richard worked late again. I helped with homework every night, taught him how to tie his shoes, how to treat women with respect, how to be a good man. I sacrificed sleep, personal time, and any semblance of a social life to make sure my boy had everything he needed. The irony is that I did too good a job. Michael grew up to be exactly the kind of man any mother would be proud of. Kind, successful, thoughtful. So when he brought Jennifer home 3 years ago, I was overjoyed. Finally, someone else to love. Someone who would appreciate what I'd built. Someone who might even become the daughter I never had. Jennifer was 28 then, with glossy brown hair and a smile that could light up a room. She worked in marketing for some tech company downtown, drove a cute little BMW, and seemed genuinely interested in family traditions. She asked for my recipes, complimented my decorating choices, and always brought thoughtful gifts to family gatherings. When Michael proposed last year, I cried tears of joy. I thought I was gaining a daughter. I spent months helping plan their wedding. Jennifer claimed her own mother was too busy with her new husband to be involved. So I stepped in gladly. I helped her pick out flowers, tasted cake samples until I was sick of buttercream, and even paid for her dress when she mentioned money was tight. Richard grumbled about the expense, but I told him it was an investment in our family's happiness. The wedding was beautiful. Jennifer looked radiant in the dress I'd bought, and Michael couldn't stop smiling. During the mother-son dance, he whispered in my ear, "Thank you for everything, Mom. None of this would be possible without you." I thought my heart might burst with pride. After they married, I made sure to give them space while still being available whenever they needed me. When Jennifer mentioned wanting to learn how to make Richard's favorite pot roast, I spent an entire Saturday teaching her my technique. When they bought their first house, I helped them paint every room and even contributed money toward their down payment. Money I'd been saving from my small part-time job at the library. I thought I was building something beautiful, a legacy of love and togetherness that would last for generations. I imagined grandchildren who would sit at my kitchen table, learning life lessons over homemade cookies just like Michael had. I pictured holiday gatherings where everyone felt welcomed and loved, where family bonds were unbreakable. But families, I've learned, are more fragile than we want to believe. Sometimes the very foundation you've spent decades building can crumble in a single moment, and all your sacrifices mean nothing to the people you've given everything to. That brings me to last month's family dinner, the night everything changed. I'd spent all day preparing Richard's favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes, green beans from my garden, and homemade dinner rolls. The dining room table was set with my grandmother's china, candles flickering softly in the warm light. I'd even made apple pie for dessert, using apples from the tree Richard and I planted when we first moved into this house. Michael and Jennifer arrived right on time, as they always did. Jennifer was wearing a stunning red dress that hugged her figure perfectly, and I remember thinking she looked particularly glowing. She kissed my cheek and complimented the table setting, just like always. Michael helped Richard open a bottle of wine while I put the finishing touches on dinner. Everything seemed normal. We talked about work, the weather, Michael's upcoming promotion. Jennifer was quieter than usual, but I attributed it to fatigue. She'd mentioned having a busy week at the office. Richard dominated the conversation, as he always did, regaling us with stories from his sales meetings that no one found as fascinating as he did. But there was something different in the air that night, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Jennifer kept glancing between Richard and me with an expression I couldn't read. She barely touched her food, pushing the pot roast around her plate like she was nervous about something. When I asked if she was feeling all right, she just smiled that perfect smile and said she was fine. Well, about halfway through dinner, Jennifer excused herself to use the bathroom. She was gone for almost 10 minutes, and when she came back, her lipstick was freshly applied, and she had this strange, almost excited look in her eyes. She sat back down and reached for her wine glass, then seemed to think better of it and pushed it away. That should have been my first clue. After dinner, while Michael and Richard settled into the living room to watch some game on TV, Jennifer offered to help me clear the table. This wasn't unusual. She always helped with cleanup, but something about her energy felt different, electric, almost manic. We were loading the dishwasher when she suddenly stopped and turned to me. "Patricia," she said, and there was something in her voice that made me look up from the plates I was rinsing. "I have something to tell you." I smiled encouragingly, expecting maybe an announcement about a promotion at work or plans for a vacation. "What is it, sweetheart?" She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and cloying that Richard had given her for Christmas. Her eyes were bright, almost feverish, and there was a smile playing at the corners of her mouth that didn't look entirely friendly. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, leaning in so close I could feel her breath on my ear. My heart leaped with joy. A grandchild. Finally, the family would grow, and I'd get to experience the joy of being a grandmother. I started to pull back to look at her face, to congratulate her properly, but she grabbed my arm and held me close. "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby, you tacky old woman." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't process what she'd said. It was like my brain simply refused to accept the information. Pregnant. With Richard's baby. My Richard. My husband of 37 years. I looked into her eyes and saw nothing but cruel satisfaction there. She was enjoying this moment, savoring my shock like it was a fine wine. This wasn't a confession born of guilt or remorse. This was a weapon, carefully sharpened and delivered at the perfect moment to cause maximum damage. But here's the thing about being 60 years old and having survived every disappointment life can throw at you. You develop a certain immunity to shock. Maybe it was the years of Richard's subtle cruelties, his casual dismissals, his growing distance. Maybe it was the way Jennifer had always been just a little too interested in what Richard was doing, a little too eager to laugh at his jokes. Maybe some part of me had always known this day would come. Instead of screaming, instead of crying, instead of falling apart the way she clearly expected me to, I did something that surprised us both. I laughed. Not a bitter, angry laugh, but a genuine chuckle that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. "Don't worry, dear," I said, my voice steady and calm as I gently removed her hand from my arm. "Don't worry about that at all." The satisfaction drained from her face, replaced by confusion and something that might have been fear. She'd expected tears, accusations, maybe even violence. She'd armed herself for battle and instead found herself facing someone who seemed almost amused by her revelation. I turned back to the dishes, methodically finishing the cleanup while she stood there gaping at me. My hands were steady as I wiped down the counters, put away the leftover pot roast, and folded the dish towels. Inside, something was dying. 37 years of marriage, the image of the family I thought I'd built, the trust I'd placed in two people I loved. but outside, I was calm as a lake on a windless day. "Patricia." Jennifer's voice was smaller now, uncertain. "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you, sweetheart," I replied without turning around. I heard every word. From the living room came the sound of the TV and occasional laughter from Michael and Richard, my son, celebrating a touchdown while his wife stood in my kitchen, having just destroyed his family. My husband watching football while his pregnant mistress waited for me to fall apart. But I wasn't going to fall apart. Not for them. Not anymore. Jennifer left soon after that, claiming she had a headache. She kissed Michael goodbye, squeezed Richard's shoulder just a little too long, and avoided looking at me entirely. Michael noticed her odd behavior and asked if everything was okay. She blamed it on work stress and promised to call him tomorrow. After they left, Richard and I cleaned up the rest of the evening in our usual comfortable silence. He complimented the pot roast, asked about my plans for the weekend, and kissed my forehead before heading upstairs to bed, just like every other night for the past 37 years, just like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. As I sat alone in my kitchen, the grandfather clock in the hallway chiming 11, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The betrayal wasn't just Richard's infidelity. It was Jennifer's cruelty in telling me, her satisfaction in watching me absorb the blow. It was the realization that while I'd been building what I thought was a loving family, they'd been building something else entirely behind my back. I thought about all the times Jennifer had been so helpful, so interested in family stories and traditions. Had she been gathering intelligence? I thought about Richard's recent late nights at the office and weekend golf games with clients. How long had this been going on? How blind had I been? But more than the betrayal, what hurt most was the assumption that I would simply crumble, that 35 years of being the family's foundation meant I was weak rather than strong. They'd underestimated me, both of them. They thought they could destroy everything I'd built and I would just quietly disappear, maybe conveniently die of heartbreak to make their lives easier. They were wrong. Sitting there in my quiet kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of what I thought was a perfect family dinner, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to rage and scream and make it easy for them to paint me as the unstable older woman who couldn't handle the truth. I was going to be smart about this, strategic, patient. Jennifer thought she'd won by telling me her secret, by watching me absorb the shock of her revelation. But what she didn't understand was that knowledge is power, and she'd just handed me the most powerful weapon imaginable. She'd given me time to prepare, time to plan, time to decide exactly how this story was going to end, and it definitely wasn't going to end the way she expected. The first sleepless night after Jennifer's revelation, I lay in bed next to Richard, listening to his steady breathing and wondering how long he'd been living this double life. But instead of tossing and turning with anger, something strange happened. My mind became crystal clear, like a fog lifting to reveal a landscape I'd never noticed before. Suddenly, all the little inconsistencies of the past year started clicking into place, like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. Richard's emergency client meetings that always seemed to happen when Jennifer mentioned she was working late. The way he'd started showering immediately after coming home from work instead of relaxing first like he used to. How he'd begun carrying his phone everywhere, even to the bathroom, when for years it had sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. I remembered the Saturday 3 months ago when Jennifer had called, supposedly needing help moving furniture in her new office. Richard had volunteered immediately, something that would have been unthinkable before. He usually complained about any physical labor that didn't involve his golf clubs. He'd been gone for 5 hours for what should have been a 2-hour job, returning home sweaty and oddly energetic. Then there was Jennifer's sudden interest in Richard's hobbies. She'd started asking him about golf techniques at family dinners, laughing too hard at his stories about office politics, and complimenting his shirts in ways that made me vaguely uncomfortable at the time. I dismissed it as her trying to bond with her father-in-law. But now I saw it for what it really was, a woman staking her claim. The business trips had increased too. Richard, who used to hate traveling for work, had suddenly become eager to attend conferences and client meetings in other cities. And Jennifer, hadn't she mentioned several work trips recently to the same cities at the same times? I thought about Michael, my sweet boy who had no idea his wife was carrying his father's child. The way Jennifer had been acting around him lately, more affectionate than usual, almost overcompensating with kisses and compliments. Classic guilt behavior. And Michael, trusting and loving as always, had been eating it up, telling me how lucky he was to have such an attentive wife. The pregnancy timeline started to make sense too. Jennifer had been complaining about feeling nauseous in the mornings for about a month now, but she'd blamed it on stress from work. She'd also stopped drinking wine at our family dinners, something I'd noticed but hadn't thought much about at the time. But it was the small cruelties that hurt the most as I replayed them in my mind. The way Jennifer had started subtly criticizing my cooking, suggesting healthier alternatives to family recipes that had been treasured for generations. How she'd begun rearranging things in my kitchen when she helped with dinner, claiming she was just trying to be helpful. The comments about my age, disguised as concern about my health, but now revealed as attempts to make me feel obsolete. And Richard, God, how had I been so blind? The way he'd started pointing out other women's appearances when we were out together, something he'd never done in our early years. How he'd become critical of my clothes, my hair, suggesting I should update my look for a woman of my age. The distance in his touch, the perfunctory goodnight kisses, the way he'd started staying up later, claiming he couldn't sleep, but really just avoiding coming to bed with me. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd been systematically erasing me, making me feel invisible in my own life so that when the truth came out, I'd believe I deserved it. That I was too old, too boring, too set in my ways to hold anyone's interest. By dawn, I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was furious. But it was a cold, calculating fury that sharpened my mind instead of clouding it. I'd spent 35 years being reactive, being the supporter, being the one who accommodated everyone else's needs. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to be proactive. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, methodically writing down everything I could remember: dates, times, inconsistencies in their stories. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was a detective building a case. The next few days, I played the perfect wife and mother-in-law. I called Jennifer to check how she was feeling after her headache at dinner. I asked Richard about his work with the same interested smile I'd worn for decades. I maintained every routine, every kindness, every appearance of normalcy while I quietly began my investigation. First, I needed proof. Not just of the affair, but of the pregnancy and its paternity. Jennifer's cruel revelation could have been a lie designed to hurt me, though her satisfaction in telling me suggested otherwise. I needed facts, not just suspicions. I started by creating a timeline on paper marking Richard's business trips and late nights against Jennifer's social media posts and the things she'd mentioned to Michael about her schedule. The correlation was damning. They'd been in the same cities on the same nights more often than coincidence could explain. Then I did something I'd never done in 37 years of marriage. I went through Richard's things: his wallet, his credit card statements, his phone when he left it charging in the kitchen. What I found made my stomach turn. Hotel receipts for rooms booked for two, restaurant charges for expensive dinners on nights he'd claimed to be eating alone, text messages that made me want to burn the phone, intimate exchanges that revealed not just a physical affair, but an emotional one that had been going on for over a year. The worst part wasn't the sexual messages, though those were painful enough. It was reading how they talked about me. Richard called me the old ball and chain in one text. Jennifer referred to me as the obstacle in another. They discussed how boring our family dinners were, how pathetic it was that I still tried so hard to please everyone. But the text that nearly broke my resolve came from Jennifer, sent just 2 weeks before our family dinner. I can't wait to see her face when she finds out. The self-righteous old cow thinks she's so perfect. It's going to destroy her. They hadn't just planned the affair. They'd planned my humiliation. That night, I lay in bed making plans while Richard slept peacefully beside me, probably dreaming of his pregnant mistress. I needed professional help, but I had to be careful. This was a small town and gossip traveled fast. I couldn't risk word getting back to them before I was ready. I remembered David Martinez, a private investigator who'd spoken at the library's mystery book club last year. He'd seemed discreet and professional, and most importantly, he was based in the next county over. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes to his office and hired him to investigate my husband's affair. David was kind but businesslike, which I appreciated. He didn't offer sympathy or ask unnecessary questions. He simply took the information I provided, explained his process, and gave me a timeline for results. Within 2 weeks, he'd have photographic evidence, complete financial records, and a detailed report of Richard and Jennifer's activities. While David worked, I consulted with an attorney. Margaret Chen had handled my neighbor's divorce 3 years earlier and had a reputation for being both thorough and ruthless when necessary. She explained my rights, helped me understand the financial implications of divorce, and most importantly, advised me on how to protect myself legally. Document everything, Margaret told me during our confidential consultation. Keep copies of all financial records. Take photographs of any evidence you find, and whatever you do, don't let them know you're aware of the situation until we're ready to move forward. I also made an appointment with my family doctor, Dr. Patterson, whom I'd known for 15 years. I explained that I suspected my husband was having an affair and that I was concerned about sexually transmitted diseases. He was understanding and professional, ordering a complete panel of tests and assuring me that my results would remain confidential. The tests came back clean, which was a relief, but the process of taking them made the betrayal feel more real. I wasn't just a woman whose feelings had been hurt. I was a woman whose health had been put at risk by her husband's selfishness. But the pregnancy was still the wild card. If Jennifer was lying about being pregnant, or if the baby wasn't Richard's, it would change everything. I needed proof, one way or another. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Michael called me on a Thursday afternoon, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, Jennifer and I have some incredible news. We want to take you and Dad out to dinner this weekend to celebrate." My heart sank. They were going to announce the pregnancy publicly, with Jennifer letting everyone assume the baby was Michael's. She'd get to play the glowing, expectant mother while I sat there knowing the truth, forced to smile and congratulate her on carrying my husband's child. But I had to play along. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. What's the occasion?" "I can't tell you over the phone, but it's the best news we could possibly have. Jennifer's been feeling a little under the weather lately, but she's doing better now. I think you'll understand why when you hear our announcement." Saturday evening at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where Richard and I had celebrated our wedding anniversary for the past 10 years, I sat across from Jennifer and watched her perform. She was radiant in a flowing dress that cleverly concealed her still flat stomach, her hand resting protectively over her middle in a gesture I recognized from my own pregnancy 40 years ago. Michael could barely contain his excitement as we ordered appetizers. Richard played the surprise father-in-law perfectly, asking all the right questions and expressing all the appropriate concerns. Jennifer glowed under the attention, accepting congratulations with graceful humility. "We wanted you two to be the first to know," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You've both been such wonderful examples of what a marriage should be. We hope our family will be as strong and loving as yours has been." The audacity of it took my breath away. She was announcing her pregnancy with my husband's child while praising our marriage, squeezing the hand of the woman she was destroying, accepting the blessings of the son she was betraying. "How far along are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "About 8 weeks," she replied. "We just found out for sure this week." 8 weeks. That would put conception right around the time of Richard's client conference in Chicago, the same conference Jennifer had mentioned attending for her company. David's preliminary report had already confirmed they'd stayed in the same hotel. I smiled and raised my wine glass. "To new beginnings," I said, looking directly into Jennifer's eyes. She smiled back, probably thinking she was so clever, so untouchable. But I wasn't done gathering evidence. Over the next week, I did something I'd never imagined I was capable of. I became a spy in my own home. When Richard showered, I photographed text messages on his phone. When he left his laptop open, I copied files to a flash drive. I documented his comings and goings, recorded his lies about where he'd been. I also started preparing for my future. I opened my own checking account at a different bank and began transferring money from our joint savings, money I'd earned from my part-time job at the library, money that was legally mine. I researched apartments, looked into health insurance options, and started the painful process of imagining a life without the family I'd spent decades building. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy with Michael. My sweet boy called every few days to chat about the pregnancy, asking for advice about cribs and baby names, sharing his excitement about becoming a father. Each conversation was like a knife in my heart, because I knew I was going to have to destroy his world to save my own. 3 weeks after that dinner at Romano's, David Martinez called with his final report. The evidence was overwhelming and incontrovertible. Photographs of Richard and Jennifer entering and leaving hotels together, credit card records showing purchases of jewelry, flowers, and intimate dinners, text messages that detailed not just their affair, but their mockery of me and their plans for the future. The most damaging evidence was a recorded phone conversation David had captured using legal surveillance methods. Jennifer and Richard discussing what would happen after Patricia finds out, how they'd handle the divorce, and their excitement about starting their new life together. They'd already picked out names for the baby and were planning to move in together as soon as Richard left me. But David had saved the best for last. Through his connections in the medical field, he'd obtained proof that Jennifer had indeed taken a pregnancy test at a clinic downtown, and that the timing of conception aligned perfectly with Richard's documented whereabouts during their Chicago trip. Now I had everything I needed. The question was how to use it. Margaret Chen and I spent hours planning the confrontation. She advised against a private conversation that could be denied later. Instead, she suggested a public revelation that would make it impossible for them to spin the story in their favor or claim I was lying out of spite. "You want this to be clean and definitive," she explained. "No room for doubt, no opportunity for them to paint you as the unstable older woman who couldn't handle the truth. The evidence speaks for itself." That's when I came up with the idea of the family dinner. One last gathering, just like the one where Jennifer had whispered her cruel secret to me. But this time, I would be the one delivering surprises. I planned it carefully. A Sunday afternoon dinner. Nothing special, just the 4 of us like always. I prepared Richard's favorite meal again. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, dinner rolls. I even made another apple pie, wanting everything to seem perfectly normal until the moment I chose to detonate the bomb Jennifer had handed me. I spent that morning cooking and setting the table with the same attention to detail I'd always shown. My grandmother's china, fresh flowers from the garden, candles waiting to be lit. But this time, I had a special place setting waiting in the kitchen, a manila folder containing David's complete report, Margaret's legal documents, and a few personal touches of my own. Michael and Jennifer arrived right on time, just like before. Jennifer was showing now, her pregnancy visible in the way she carried herself and the loose-fitting clothes she favored. She kissed my cheek and complimented the table, played her role perfectly. Michael helped Richard with the wine while I made final preparations. But this time, I was ready for her. This time, I held all the cards. During dinner, I was the perfect hostess. I asked about Jennifer's doctor appointments, offered advice about morning sickness remedies, and listened to Michael's excited plans for converting their spare room into a nursery. Richard dominated the conversation with his usual stories, completely oblivious to what was coming. After we finished eating, I stood up with a smile. "I have a little surprise for everyone," I announced, walking to the kitchen to retrieve my carefully prepared folder, something special I've been working on. I returned to the dining room and placed the folder on the table in front of Jennifer. Her face was curious but unsuspecting, probably expecting baby photos or family memorabilia. "What is it?" she asked, reaching for the folder. "Open it and see," I replied, taking my seat with the calm smile I'd perfected over the past month. Jennifer opened the folder, and I watched as her face changed from curiosity to confusion to absolute horror. The first photograph showed her and Richard entering a hotel together, his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that was unmistakably intimate. The second showed them kissing in the lobby of that same hotel. "What is this?" Michael asked, leaning over to look at the papers his wife was holding with trembling hands. "It's a DNA test authorization form," I said pleasantly, as if we were discussing the weather. "I thought it might be helpful to determine paternity before the baby arrives. Just to make sure there are no surprises." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer's face had gone completely white, and Richard was staring at the photographs with the expression of a man watching his entire life implode. Michael was still processing, looking back and forth between the evidence and the two people he trusted most in the world. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "What is this supposed to mean?" I reached across the table and gently took his hand. "It means, sweetheart, that the baby your wife is carrying isn't yours. It's your father's." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Michael's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, confusion, dawning understanding, and finally devastating hurt. He looked at Jennifer, who was crying now, makeup running down her cheeks in black streaks. "Is this true?" he whispered. She couldn't speak, could only nod as sobs racked her body. Richard, meanwhile, had found his voice. "Patricia, I can explain." "No," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You really can't. The evidence speaks for itself. Phone records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, text messages. It's all there." I stood up again, maintaining my dignity while the world collapsed around everyone else. "I filed for divorce, Richard. You'll be served with papers tomorrow. I've also contacted a lawyer about the financial implications of your extracurricular activities." Jennifer was hyperventilating now, gasping between sobs. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she managed to say. "No," I agreed. "It was supposed to happen with me quietly disappearing after you destroyed me with your little revelation. But here's the thing about underestimating people. Sometimes they surprise you." Michael stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward. "I need to leave," he said, his voice hollow. I can't be here right now." As my son walked out of the house I'd made into a home for him, I felt a moment of crushing sadness. He was the innocent victim in all of this, and I knew he was going to need time to process what his wife and father had done to him. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of finally standing up for myself. Richard tried to follow Michael, probably to offer explanations and excuses, but I stopped him. "Don't," I said. "You've done enough damage. Let him have some space." Jennifer was still crying, mascara streaking down her face, her perfect composure completely shattered. "The DNA test will prove it's Richard's baby," she said desperately, as if that would somehow fix everything. I smiled then, the same calm smile I'd given her in my kitchen that night she'd whispered her secret. "Actually, sweetheart, the DNA test already proved it. I had it done 3 weeks ago using samples I collected from both of you. The results are in the folder." The look of absolute defeat on her face was everything I'd hoped for and more. Jennifer, the woman who had called me a tacky old woman, who had planned my humiliation with such glee, was finally seeing what it felt like to be destroyed by someone she'd underestimated. "Don't worry, dear," I said, echoing the words I'd spoken to her that night. "Don't worry about any of this. You'll figure out how to explain it to everyone. You'll find a way to rebuild your life after losing everything you thought you had." I walked to the front door and held it open. "Now, I think it's time for both of you to leave. This is still my house until the divorce is final, and I'd like you both to go." As they gathered their things and stumbled toward the door, Richard made one last attempt at salvaging something from the wreckage. "Patricia, please, we can work through this. It doesn't have to end this way." I looked at the man I'd spent 37 years loving, the man who'd shared my bed while planning his future with another woman, and felt nothing but pity. "You're right," I said quietly. "It didn't have to end this way, but you made your choices, and I've made mine. The DNA test didn't ruin the shrew, Richard. The shrew ruined herself." After they left, I stood in my dining room surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a perfect family dinner. The candles were still flickering, the dishes were still on the table, but everything was different now. I wasn't the victim of this story anymore. I wasn't the woman who'd been betrayed and humiliated and cast aside for a younger model. I was the woman who'd taken control, who'd refused to be destroyed, who'd fought back with intelligence instead of emotion. For the first time in months, I felt truly free.